welcome to a special report on why Eagles, why the team getting ready for the playoffs. You know all about the injuries, and we've got the doctor, and not just any doctor, the doctor, Bruce Grossinger, the Philly sports doc. He's got a varied background in so many other areas that lead into this. Bruce, we're delighted to have you. First of all, before we get into the Eagles, let's talk about you, your business, and then how you got connected with sports and doing what you're doing now.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, David Pete. Glad to be here. Well, for the last 30 years, I've been practicing sports medicine, and I've been an Eagles season ticket holder for that same duration. So during that time, I've also been involved in media, in radio, and most recently, I'm on WABC Jacob Media. I do all of this, the sports medicine, sports injuries for the Philadelphia Eagles. So that leads us in. The name of my practice is Philadelphia PRP and Stem Cell Institute. I'm right at the airport. So anybody who's watching this, who's anywhere near the tri-state area, and they have a problem with any joints, just like we're talking about with our Eagles players, shoulders, knees, hips, spine, you name it, we could get you better without surgery and without dangerous drugs. And we could, of course, we have operators on duty right now, and our number right here is 610-222-5675. So I've treated in the background, you can see Wilbert Montgomery. He's one of my patients, and a lot of the former Eagles are my patients, and they come on, and they come into my office. And so I got started by trying to help people by transplanting cells. If you remember, Bryce Harper had a common extensor tendon that was partially ruptured, and he got PRP, platelet-rich plasma, basically his own cells without any cutting, and Bryce Harper was able to play all the way through Game 6 of the World Series. Wow. So that's the kind of work we do here. We also use real stem cells from the patient's own body. We don't use frozen umbilical cells from St. Elsewhere. They don't work. We don't transplant fat because, you know, Dave and Pete, you know where all the toxins in the body go? They go right to the fat. So we're not going to be like so many of our competitors. It's cheap to just take fat and dump it in somebody's shoulder, but that's called, there used to be an old movie. Remember that guy Steve Guttenberg was called Bad Medicine about medical school in Guadalajara? You remember that, Dave? That's not the kind of that's not the medicine we practice here.
I know that people like Wilbert Montgomery must be delighted to see the advancements in medicine as he played with the Eagles Super Bowl team in 1980. And here we are later. And speaking about a potential Eagles Super Bowl team, and the biggest story has been Jalen Hurts because he missed 2 games. The Eagles lost both games. He came back against the Giants, and they worked a conservative game plan to protect him. Now, the average person, Bruce, will say, strained shoulder. Oh, he should have come back against the Saints. So there's something going on there that most people will not see about what happens with a shoulder strain as it's reported. What was going on with that with Jalen Hurts? How bad is it? The degrees of it? And where is he now in all of that?
Great question, Dave. Jalen Hurts had somewhat of an atypical strain. So all strains are not created equal. I'm going to use my pen right now. He strained this part of the shoulder, which is basically the joint or the articulation between the sternum, the breastplate, and the clavicle right here. So why is that important? And this is his throwing arm. Whenever he releases a ball, it involves moving forward and finishing up to the side. So any kind of throw puts stress on this joint. So the grade of this is an intermediate sternoclavicular strain. It's a grade 2. And I believe that when he played the other day against the Giants, from what I hear, 80 to 90% healed. So he wasn't at his best, and he was also fitted with a pad that covered the sternoclavicular joint, and he's not used to playing with it. So I'm hoping in the 2 weeks between now and the divisional playoff This joint is going to have time he's getting a lot of therapy. This is an inflamed area. It's not totally torn, but by golly, it's inflamed. He's going to need ice, physical therapy, stretching, range of motion, and he's gradually going to be increasing his ability to throw the ball. So this will not only affect the velocity of his throws, but also the trajectory of his throws and the ability to throw from different platforms. Why is that important? The one guy who throws from the most platforms is Patrick Mahomes. He can throw from anywhere, including submarine pitcher. And Jalen Hurts, watch him carefully, also had an ability somewhat lesser than Mahomes. But if you watch the game as I did, he was very limited in his ability to come across, and his throws were a lot of wrist flicks, and his accuracy was not up to Jalen Hurts. We're hoping, and we believe truly, that with therapy, rest, and with practice for 2 weeks, he's going to use every bit of those 2 weeks to get back to form. And I'm optimistic that Jalen Hurts will be 90 to 95%, and we're going to need it, depending on who we play. Particularly if we play the Cowboys or the Bucs, not so much if we play Seattle or the Giants, which I think, particularly the Giants, I think we have their number. In Seattle, asking them to come from Seattle with Geno Smith, I think we'd be a nightmare for them. So I'm hoping, but I'm not optimistic that Seattle will beat San Francisco. I think that's a pipe dream. I'm hoping, but not optimistic, that the Giants are going to beat the Vikings. And I think we're going to get stuck playing terrific Tom Brady or those dreaded Cowboys. And if I could see the crystal ball, if I knew that we could beat the Cowboys, that would be my first choice.
Me too.
All right, now, Pete, that's also one of the things you've been talking about on the show. We're getting some of the answers that we wanted that we've been talking about here.
Yeah, that was what we talked about yesterday. I mean, I know a lot of people wouldn't agree with me, but I think it would be the most entertaining playoff if we get to play the Cowboys. I mean, if we don't get to play the Cowboys, then I want to play the worst team. I'll play Seattle. But yeah, I would love to play the Cowboys. I don't fear the Cowboys. I think the Eagles are much more talented than them, and then and it just, for me, it comes down to if the coaches can put a good game plan out, and if our guys are healthy. And speaking of health, another guy who's been crucial to this team, hasn't given up a sack in 2.5 years, Lane Johnson. We've seen it every time he doesn't play. We've seen the pressure coming from the right side that we kind of take him for granted. I mean, because now you see the pressure coming like a normal line. When he's there, I mean, it's shut down. Like, there's no pressure. How serious is his injury? Is it hindered him? If he comes back in the playoffs, is he going to be dealing with the pain? Is it just pain? Is there a chance for re-injury? I know we need surgery at the end of the season, but I've heard it's just pain he has to deal with, and he's a pretty tough guy. So,
yeah, so he is dealing with, really, it's called a core muscle injury, but it's also called a sports hernia. You'll recall that Donovan McNabb had a sports hernia, and he went and had a repair. He didn't play through it. If you remember, going back to Deshaun Jackson, a lot of mistakes were made with him. Deshaun Jackson had a sports hernia, and he waited about 2 months, and then he decided to get the surgery, and then he came back. That was a whole year disaster with Deshaun Jackson. I believe, for what I understand, that this is luckily not an umbilical situation, which would be more painful, but instead I believe it's right-sided. It's a partial tear of his oblique muscle and his rectus abdominis. So the good news is the abdomen is stabilized by 3 layers of muscle, and this is essentially one of the superficial layers. So he, with time and rehab, and also wearing a really somewhat cumbersome brace, should be okay as far as not making it worse or re-injuring it. There is always a possibility. You're never guaranteed. You can't extend the tear, and they're hoping that won't happen. But what I've been told is in 2 weeks he'll be 90% Lane Johnson. He'll have a big brace in basically his abdomen and groin, and he should be able to deal with the pain and be Lane Johnson again and play to the end of the season. Much like Deshaun Jackson tried to play through, the sports hernia, and he failed, but they have slightly different body types. So I'm confident in
Slightly.
Lane. I'm confident in Lane's work ethic. Not speaking to Deshaun, we'll omit talking about that.
Yeah, I know. I know.
But I remember Sean. The one thing that really chafed at me with Deshaun Jackson, I was at that game, the Giants game at home during COVID, and Deshaun Jackson scored a touchdown and then decided to do a flip into the end zone and re-injured himself for about 6 games. Now, the good news is Lane Johnson isn't going to be such a bonehead, and Deshaun Jackson, if he had anything left, wouldn't have been cut by the Baltimore Ravens. But in his day, Deshaun Jackson was one of my favorite guys, particularly against that miracle in the Meadowlands. Yeah. But I'll get off of that. But just thinking about that, he had a whole wasted year. He stole money for a year. He should have had that core muscle surgery at the beginning. But obviously, Lane is getting better advice.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's we'll stick with Lane Johnson. I'll go back to Jalen Hurts with you later too. Now with Lane Johnson, the thought was, okay, he's going to delay surgery and rest and be ready for the postseason. Had this happened earlier in the year and they decided to go with the surgery, could he have come back and played after the surgery? Or if he had decided to get surgery for this, it's the end of the year? What kind of decisions were being made by him, and what kind of considerations were in front of him?
Great question. If he was just a regular guy like you and me, and I had that surgery personally, so I've had that surgery. I played ice hockey competitively, and I had that surgery. For you and me, it might be a 2 to 3 week recovery. For a player, particularly in the trenches, it could have been 4 to 6 weeks. So my feeling is, if this occurred during the preseason, it would have been a no-brainer. He would have gotten totally repaired in a month, 4 to 6 weeks later. But given the fact it was the middle of the season, if he were to get the surgery, it would clearly wipe him out for the playoffs. That would be very adverse. And obviously, if it was a tenuous situation, there are certain hernias where there's a thing called a strangulated hernia, where the bowel actually pops through the hole in the muscles, and the bowel can become necrotic and ischemic. That could be dangerous or even life-threatening. I haven't treated Lane Johnson. That's my disclaimer. But I'm sure if it was that situation, it would have been mandated that he have the surgery. I believe it's optional, and we're all hopeful he'll be 90% in 2 weeks.
That's good news. I mean, this offensive line, in my opinion, when they run, the team runs on both sides. And another, a lot of people are overlooking until the last few games when we played without him is Avonte Maddox. He has a turf toe, I believe. And could you tell the audience like what exactly turf toe is? I mean, most people just think it's a sore toe or a bruised toe.
Yeah, I wish it was.
Yeah,
a turf toe is something that all professional athletes fear. Mm-hmm. The big toe is the end of the kinetic chain. So any athlete, particularly those like Avonte Maddox, who has to be able to cut and be quick and change directions, the whole flow of the kinetic chain begins with the great toe. And the problem with the turf toe and the injury there, Avonte Maddox was tackling Dak Prescott for a sack, and he was in one of the best stadiums or one of the worst fields, AT&T Stadium, Jerry's World. It's really a bad surface there. And if you watch in slow motion, you can see Avonte Maddox's toe being extended. And what he did is he tore the whole structure of his great toe. That's what a turf toe is. So he lost the stability of his toe with respect to bringing his toe up and also the lateral stability. And so that really involves the joint below the toe. It involves the ligaments and tendons. And if he were to have surgery, which may or may not be required, it could be a 2 to 6 month recovery, very variable. So there are plenty of athletes whose career have been ended. Deion Sanders, who was a Hall of Fame player, his career ended with a turf toe. And Michael Irvin, and there's one other player I'm trying to think of. What I really think is that, going back to Andrew Toney, a basketball player, he had kind of a phantom foot problem that they couldn't figure out. That was before they understood that turf toes are what they are. The most feared injury, and they said it was serious, but they didn't say what it was. And what I've heard, at least the inference is this is a turf toe. Unfortunately, Avonte Maddox, I believe, will be out this year. Will be out for the playoffs. They'll try to rehab it, and he may require surgery. But C.J. Gardner-Johnson will be playing. Luckily, he's back from his lacerated kidney, from his rib injury, and also more recently, they also disclosed there was a bit of a spleen injury. It wasn't a complete. They didn't have to do a splenectomy or remove his spleen, but when he had that rib injury, he injured his kidney, he had bleeding in the kidney, but also injured the spleen. So you don't mess around with that, and they didn't. And they were conservative, and Gardner Johnson's one of their best players, and we're really happy that he's back because Avonte Maddox will likely not return for the playoffs.
We hit something interesting here, Doctor, as far as how the Eagles benefit with this bye week, and we can look at it medically. Now, if we figure that Jalen Hurts and Lane Johnson could be 90% or better in a couple of weeks. So what would that have been like had they had to play a game this weekend? Now, because they've got this bye, you've got this week off. Now, how valuable is that from a standpoint of where would Jalen Hurts be? Would we be looking at 75% if he had to play this week? If Lane Johnson had to play, could he play this week? How much more of an improvement are we going to see over them in these next 2 weeks?
Yeah, I would say the differential, Hurts was very adequate. A lot of the problems with him were related to the offensive line play. They didn't pick up on the stunts that were offered by Wink Martindale. And we also had Jack Driscoll, who's a very good run blocker, but a very poor pass blocker. Mm-hmm. So the difference between him and Lane is worlds different. So I believe if they had to play in the upcoming week, obviously Hurts would be playing and Lane would be toughing it out. But if you're just asking for a number, to pull a number out of the air, I'd say the extra week will give each player okay, I'll answer it. I would say it'll give about an extra 5%. So it's not huge, but it's tangible. So I would say the extra week will give each one of them an extra 5% in their ability to be more like themselves. And I think that's a good thing.
Do you would you have held Jalen Hurts out in the game against the Giants last week before, obviously, when in hindsight, the game was so close that you wouldn't now, but before you knew going into it, okay, we knew we were playing the second, third string. Everybody thought they were going to roll over them. Would you have went with Gardner Minshew knowing how long it does take for his shoulder to heal? So it would be almost close to 95%, 100% by the playoffs.
I would have done exactly what they did.
Okay.
I know the people I know the physicians there, the training staff. I haven't examined the Eagles. I'm the expert for as a sports doc, but like many national experts, I'm asked to comment on Tua and Damar and all those people. So what I would say is I believe the Eagles always play it on the side of caution. They do. Sometimes to a fault. Just the idea of not even really hitting in the training camp and not really practicing. I have mixed feelings about that. But I have no doubt that Jalen Hurts was safe. He was safe to play. He just was off for a few weeks. He wasn't optimum. And his offensive line didn't do him any favors, nor did the play calling where they decided to let him throw like the first 6 times. The play calling was unusually boneheaded. And when they started out the second half with 2 runs and a pass and they played play action, it took the pressure off of him. So I would say he was safe to play or they wouldn't have played him. And also looking at Minshew, I was always and still am a Gardner Minshew fan. Yeah, epically poor game. One of the worst games I've seen. And only having 1 first down with 12 seconds left. I think Minshew was seeing ghosts. He was doing a little Darnold. He couldn't complete a 5-yard pass to a wide open Dallas Goedert and missed him by 5 yards. I think it was in his head. And the thing about Minshew is he's a rhythm quarterback. So as long as he's in rhythm, he could be good. But he doesn't go to a second read. And when you get him out of rhythm by playing press coverage, he was completely out of sorts. And Wink Martindale is the smartest and best defensive coordinator. And if they would have played Minshew, even though the game was boring and ugly, and they won. It was just a slugfest with 5 field goals. I'm not sure Minshew would have won that game. So I think, Hurts was not put in harm's way. He didn't get hurt in the game at all, from what I understand. So that's good. And also Minshew may have lost the game because he's the second coming of Bobby Hoying.
Yeah,
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with you about Minshew. That first series, he got hit hard twice, and then after that, he kind of, you can tell he was shook up a little bit. He wasn't expecting that. Yeah.
I want to connect what both of you are saying to the situation going back 1 week to continue our trajectory on Jalen Hurts, because before the New Orleans Saints, he was pushing to play. He wanted to play, and the team held him out. As you look at it now, where was he during that time, and what is that like between the player and the team? The player's saying one thing, the team is talking to the doctors. This is going back before the New Orleans Saints game when Hurts was pushing to play, and the Eagles said, not this week.
I think that was a really wise decision. The grade 2 sternoclavicular strain is a 2 to 3 week recovery. It's pretty tight. So there's certain injuries like the turf toe that are highly variable between players. Some players, regrettably, some are disabled. They never could return to play. That's unusual, but it happens. It happened with Deion Sanders, different technology decades ago. But this sternoclavicular, it's clear that it was a 2 to 3 week. He had it fully healed. He's a stoic guy. He's a warrior. And I don't second guess that decision. I also look at how Minshew played in the Cowboys game. I thought he was very serviceable. The Cowboys didn't exploit him the way the Saints did. And it's easy to be, especially in my field, to second guess decisions. But I think it was a very wise decision to rest him the extra week. And I think Minshew, it wasn't critical. They always had the safety net of beating the Giants. And the fact the Giants didn't play, they played, what's his name, Davis Webb, who is actually, he's got an interesting story. He's a guy from Mississippi. And my son Spencer's not here. Davis Webb's one of his favorite players. He's a guy who was at Buffalo. He's really a coach on the field. That's why they brought him into the Giants, not to play but be a coach. But he's a brilliant guy. And Davis Webb's going to be a coach, probably a head coach of the league. And I thought he played really well. Obviously, I'm an Eagles fan. But Webb, I think, showed incredible, even though you look at the final score, but he evaded a lot of rushes and really good college player. But that's Davis Webb for you. Yeah,
I agree with you about the decision to not play Hurts in New Orleans. I don't think, if you watched Dave knows, I've been critical of the coaching staff all season, and I kind of been hoping I've been wrong, but it's been getting worse and worse in my opinion. I feel like they didn't do Minshew any favors in the Dallas game or the New Orleans game. Like you said, he came out and threw the ball 3 times. It's very confusing the play call these last few games, and I feel like they're not using the talent like they should, and I hope that Giants game is a kick in the butt to this coaching staff because we have a talented team and they just don't seem to know how to use them, and they don't seem to know how to use them now. It's kind of quite interesting.
I'll totally agree. Shane Steichen at times could be tremendous, a very good play caller. But the idea of coming out with a new quarterback, Minshew, and just having him throw and not running Miles Sanders, and that's kind of a theme with the Eagles. They love to throw the ball. I could look at since Jeffrey Lurie took over the team. They just love to throw the ball, and they know the ownership and how they don't like to see a run. But when the Eagles had their most success last year, Miles Sanders, and you look at Boston Scott, they call him the giant killer. But you know what? He doesn't have a chance to run against anybody else. So whoever we play, particularly the Giants, in that divisional playoff game, run the ball. And, you're going to see some RPOs. You're going to see Hurts running. That's what he does. Yeah. And a lot of times, he'll run straight through. If you saw that national championship game yesterday, the quarterback for Georgia had 2 touchdowns where he wasn't touched. That's the kind of scheme that Steichen could do for the RPO with Hurts, and that's what you got to do. But when you have Miles Sanders, who had a career year, he had to. He wants a contract with somebody, and it's amazing how his hamstring healed. It's funny how that is in the contract deal.
Yeah. Contract years, they seem to heal it.
It doesn't hurt as much as I thought.
It doesn't hurt. Maybe I can play through it, And I remember Byron Evans. Remember that B&E? That was a classic case of a guy. Lamar Jackson this year. He bet on himself, and what did he do? He blew out his ACL. And guess what Byron Evans got? Nothing. Lamar Jackson doesn't have a contract. He's betting on himself. You know why? You know what they say? He who represents himself as a lawyer has a fool for a client. Lamar Jackson, he who represents himself as an agent has a fool for a client. Lamar, take the 40 million. I'm sorry, no, whatever, 400, whatever the hell it was.
Yeah,
take it.
40, yeah.
Just because they guarantee you more than 40, that's a year. Take the money, even though it's 30. Don't compare yourself to Kyler Murray. But in his year, they said, hold the line. And then what he did, he got hurt. So that has nothing to do with medicine. But the nice thing about Rover Sports, my other show, is we can rove.
Well, you know what? Talking about something to do with medicine, we're seeing this with a number of quarterbacks now. Like, Tua Tagovailoa, you said it. You've talked about him a number of times. Now, here's a guy that they're going to push for him to play this weekend against the Buffalo Bills, but he's had so many concussions, shouldn't play, and I'm guessing that discussion is going on in Miami as well. Oh, well, he wants to play, he shouldn't. But what is going on in the game? Are these guys just so big and so fast and so strong that quarterbacks just get hurt so much worse than we ever saw in the past? Is it the weight and the speed of these defenders?
That's definitely a contributing factor. The mass and the speed, particularly of the defensive linemen and the linebackers, those who hit the quarterbacks, they're much bigger and much faster. Incredible. But also, there's a higher recognition. It's only really been 10 years since they re-implemented the concussion protocol in 2012. And since right before that, there was an understanding of CTE, the cumulative effects of traumatic injuries, the $1 billion settlement. And ironically, I think I'm the Bermuda Triangle for Tua, because I attended both games. I have a house in Miami. I attended the original Bills-Miami game. I was at that game with my son Spencer. And then I came back, and I was at the Packers game, which was interesting. I'm not saying this had to do with his concussion. This was on Christmas Eve. It was 45 degrees with a 20-mile-an-hour wind. I was there with people from Green Bay. They said they'd never been colder than at that Miami game, which I thought was funny. But anytime I go to see Tua, he always gets a concussion. So I think, number one, I think the optics of it, Miami, even if he's ready and he has cleared the protocol, from a liability, from an optics standpoint, with 3 concussions, 2 diagnosed and 3 other clear, Tua is not playing. But I think that there's a much higher sensitivity and understanding of barometer. Back in the old days when friends of mine like Mike Quick and Seth Joyner played, they called you just got dinged up. You got dinged up and they sent you back in. Chris Hanberger, if you remember him, they called the coat hanger. This guy was a thin guy for the Redskins, and his patented move was to basically clothesline quarterbacks and basically rip their head off. And you know what they did? They got a stinger or a dinger, and they came back in the game. And a lot of those guys have CTE today.
Yeah, probably the guys that break up the old wedge, too, on kick returns. That was
they did, and that was the most dangerous position.
It was always the backup linebackers, like Short. I remember the guy Short, his last name Short, and he was just the guy that broke the wedge. I'm like, a human bowling ball.
That goes as sacrificial lamb, and also just not to get into concussion, we can have a whole show on that.
Yeah,
but it's interesting that with the returners, the force of their hits were not in the same area. So a lot of times, Dave Webster, who from the I think his name was Dave Webster from the Steelers, who was the poster child for CTE, the center for so many years. Webster was unusual, but a lot of the most severe injuries are to the wide receivers. Chris Henry, if you remember him, from the Bengals, this guy jumped off a car and basically killed himself. But these speed positions, these returners, because the force vector is so variable, so many different parts of their brain is injured, and we've looked at it experimentally, that those people tend to have accelerated CT, where the linemen, for the most part, they're going forward, and the vector is in one direction. It's lesser. It's dangerous, but lesser than the kick returners, the wide receivers, and the running backs. So that's an interesting point I could bring from medicine to the to football.
Is the rest of your work this exciting? You get to talk like this?
Well, with my patients, it is kind of exciting because everybody's different. And I have the pleasure of dealing with a lot of nice people, a lot of weekend warriors, a lot of high school, a lot of college athletes, and a lot of football and basketball players. I treat a lot of NBA players. A lot of people fly into Philly, and particularly with regenerative medicine, with PRP and stem cell. They don't want to get – I'll just mention one quick anecdote. Player for the Toronto Raptors about a year ago, he was a bench player. He knew that if the team knew that he had a partial rotator cuff tear in his shoulder, they would have just released him. He flew to Philly. He's one of my friends. I did a PRP under the covers, as they say, and he was able to play through it. We re-imaged his shoulder 3 months later, and it was totally healed without surgery. And he then played another year with the Portland Trail Blazers, and now he's in Europe. So the nice thing about PRP and stem cell, not only for professional athletes, but for weekend warriors like ourselves, David, Pete, is that people can get better without a scalpel, without years of therapy, and they can get better fast with one procedure, and that's what PRP and stem cell can do for people.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah,
the age of medical advancement.
Yeah. Before I would let you go, I would quickly give you a chance to talk about your podcast. I know you do it with your son, and if you could quickly run down. I know a lot of people have been covering this. The Damar Hamlin. What's his road to recovery look like? I know we've heard everything that happened. I mean, it was awful. Time stopped for a couple of weeks there, but now what does his road to recovery look like?
Yeah, so that's clearly a miraculous case, a combination of great medicine and a lot of prayers, and I believe in prayer, and also, great outcome. So what we understand, he's neurologically intact, but the concern is with his heart. He may have damaged his heart through this incident, where his heart, the muscle of his heart, may not be 100%. So they're going to need to study his heart. They need to do something called electrophysiological testing, where they study the wiring of his heart to make sure that he's not susceptible to sudden cardiac death or ventricular arrhythmia. He may need the implantation of a defibrillator. So many people walk around, it's not a big deal. My mom is a pacemaker. He may need a pacemaker or a defibrillator. And if he does, it's fine. I'm not sure. I can't give you a number, but given what he went through, he may not play again. The good news about the NFL is they've given him a lifetime pension. They've given him lifetime benefits. And I'm sure the Buffalo Bills and the NFL are going to give him enough money that him and his family will always be comfortable. And he was just lucky to be alive. Here in Philly some years ago, we had a guy named Hank Gathers who had a similar situation where he had sudden cardiac death on a basketball court, and they didn't have defibrillators back then. And Bo Kimball, the Bo Kimball Foundation, now there's a defibrillator in every golf course, every country club, every gym, high school, college, pro. And the fact that there is a defibrillator and CPR saved Hamlin's life, and that's a beautiful thing.
It is. For most people, we run into a collision like that. We're not at a stadium. We're not on television. We're not people. We'll have no chance if that happens to any one of us normally in those situations. That those things are not around us. So
exactly. So interesting, Dave. If that would have happened in a hospital or a professional football field, they're the two safest places to have commotio cordis, which is basically the heart being stunned exactly after there's a QRS complex. It's 1 in 10,000 or even less. The fact that hit occurred exactly after the R interval. So that in itself is rare. And this was so rare. The last football player that died on the field was Chuck Hughes over 50 years ago. So thankfully, it's very rare. And it was just unfortunate. But it was very fortunate. It was miraculous that both the Bills and the Bengals training staff immediately recognized he was in full cardiac arrest. immediately started CPR, immediately defibrillated him, immediately intubated him, stabilized him, and unbelievable care at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. And since that time, I've been, doing a lot of national, this has really been international news. And the fact that he's done so well has been just beautiful. The best thing I saw this year.
Yeah, that's like you just listed about 7 immediates, and they all had to happen. Every one of them had to happen.
Every one of those variables happened. Every one of them was handled perfectly. And I can't give enough praise. And I'm such pride to be in the medical profession, along with my colleagues who saved this kid's life.
Yeah, they really did. It was a very gratifying story about what we can see in the term medical advancement. We always hear about it, and here was a visible demonstration of the enlightened age. I think it was a victory for all of us. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we let you go, why don't you tell everybody about, I know you were telling me on the phone about you have a podcast with your son, and you cover kind of sports in general, and you cover a lot of college stuff. I know a lot of
anybody who's interested, thank you. Anybody who's interested in my content, they can go to my Facebook page. You can see it's Bruce Grossinger, Grossinger. Go to my Facebook page, and I will accept you as a friend. And basically, a lot of my content, for instance, tonight is Tuesday, will be on www.dbam.com. So you can log on any device, your computer like I am. I'm at my office computer. You could go on your phone, www.dbam.com. If you're driving around, we're the sister station to the Fanatic, 97.5 HD2, every Tuesday night from 7:15 to 8:30. And it's basically myself, my son, Spencer Grossinger, who's a high school football and basketball coach. I also have Dr. Steve Lewis, who's an excellent sports doctor and one of my best friends, if not my best friend, and also Coach Josh Daish, who coached at University of Memphis and New Mexico State, a college basketball coach. So we have 4 of us with Colin Newby. So basically, go on my Facebook page. We run a live stream. Everybody's invited. And tonight, it happens to be Tuesday. It's our night from 7:15 to 8:30. We'll be covering the Eagles, talking a little sports medicine, but most importantly, we'll be covering Wild Card Weekend and our fearless predictions for next week, and also touching a bit upon the potential opponents for the Eagles. So thank you for allowing me to be on the show. And if anybody wants to see me as a doctor, as a sports doc, just give you our number, 610-222-5675. If you have any kind of joint injury, shoulder, knee, hip, neck, and back, and you don't want to have surgery, maybe you already had surgery and you're still suffering. Maybe you had a rotator cuff repair. Maybe you had the knee surgery. Maybe you had the chicken shots for your knee. You can call me. You'll find our staff's great. They've been with us. This staff in this practice is over 20 years old. So again, 610-222-5675. I really enjoyed being on the show with you, Pete and Dave. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a great having you with. I'm putting you in my personal calendar here for when things go wrong. And to recap what Dr. Bruce told us as far as the Eagles' major takeaways, Jalen Hurts and Lane Johnson in that 90 to 95% range of effectiveness is what we think they will be when the Eagles play again. So, Dr. Bruce, thanks for being with us. We can see why people want to be around you and come to you. Thanks for joining us. And Pete, always a pleasure with you. And for all of our videos, everybody, please remember to hit like and subscribe to be notified about future videos. For Bruce and for Pete, this is Dave Bontempo saying so long, and we'll see you next time.